Waitress saves an elderly trucker. Minutes later, 500 rigs block the street. The neon sign outside Rosie's diner flickered against the dark Indiana sky, buzzing faintly as another 18-wheeler rumbled into the lot. It was just past midnight, and the air smelled of diesel and freshly brewed coffee. Maggie Lawson, a waitress who had spent the last 6 years slinging plates and pouring coffee for truckers passing through, wiped her hands on her apron. Her feet ached, but she always had a smile ready. These drivers were more than customers, they were family in a way, a brotherhood that relied on each other in a world that often ignored them. That's when she saw him. Slumped over the counter, an elderly trucker, probably in his 70s, clutched his chest with a pained grimace. His face was pale, and his breathing was shallow. "Sir, are you okay?" Maggie asked, already reaching for her phone. He shook his head, struggling to speak. "Heart, feels tight." Without hesitation, Maggie sprang into action. She had taken a CPR class years ago, never thinking she'd need it. But now, instinct took over. "Call 911, she yelled to the cook, Gus, who scrambled for the phone. Maggie knelt beside the trucker, her hands firm on his wrist, checking his pulse. It was weak. She loosened his flannel shirt, urging him to stay awake. "Stay with me, sir. Help's coming." The old man, his name was Hank, she later learned, managed a faint smile. "Maggie, right? You, remind me of my daughter." Tears burned her eyes, but she stayed strong. The paramedics arrived within minutes, whisking Hank away to the hospital. She watched as the ambulance disappeared into the night, her hands trembling. She prayed he would be okay. Then, she went back to work. That's what Maggie did, she cared, and then she carried on. But the night was far from over. An hour later, the ground trembled. The low growl of diesel engines filled the air as truck after truck pulled into the diner's lot, headlights cutting through the darkness. Maggie stepped outside, confused. That's when she saw it. The street outside the diner, both lanes, was completely blocked. Rigs. Hundreds of them. Lined up, idling, stretching back as far as she could see. A burly driver stepped forward. His CB radio crackled as another voice came through. "You Maggie?" She nodded hesitantly. The man gave her a solemn nod. "Name's Big Mike. Hank's one of us. Word got out on the radio about what you did. He's stable. But we ain't moving till we say thanks proper." Her breath hitched. She looked around, men and women climbing down from their cabs, some old, some young. Some she recognized, some she didn't. All of them here for Hank. For her. A lump formed in her throat as a driver handed her a wad of cash. "For your kindness. For Hank." She shook her head, eyes welling with tears. No, I was just doing what anyone would." Big Mike chuckled. "Not just anyone. You reminded us there's still good people out here." For the next hour, the truckers shared stories about Hank, how he had helped young drivers, how he had once driven through a snowstorm just to get medicine for a sick child. He wasn't just an old man in a diner. He was a legend among them. And now, thanks to Maggie, he had a fighting chance. By dawn, the rigs slowly dispersed, engines roaring as they pulled back onto the road, one by one. But not before every driver made sure to stop, shake Maggie's hand, and leave her with something, money, kind words, a promise that she'd always have family on the road. As the last truck disappeared over the horizon, Maggie wiped her eyes and went back inside. Gus, the cook, shook his head with a smile. "Didn't know we had a guardian angel working here." She laughed, voice still thick with emotion. "Guess I didn't either." That morning, as the sun rose over Rosie's diner, Maggie poured another cup of coffee, this time, for a waitress who had learned that kindness has a way of coming back in ways you never expect. And somewhere, miles away, 500 rigs carried a story with them, one that would be told over CB radios, in truck stops, and across endless highways, a story about the night truckers blocked a street, not for a protest, but for gratitude. For Maggie. For Hank. For the road that bound them all together. Moral of the story. A single act of kindness can create a ripple that stretches farther than we can imagine. Sometimes, the smallest gestures make the biggest difference.